Hello adventurers, and welcome back to my channel. Today we are in the Wichita Mountains and we are about to go check out something I have never seen before. The visitor center. Now this is where you should stop off every single time you come to a place to get some brain wrinkles. The problem is I haven't been able to come here because every time I've tried to come it's been at a weird time or whenever they were closed. So today we're going to be exploring what's inside, get a few brain wrinkles, and then be able to kind of see how that factors into the bigger picture. Now I do have several videos which I will link in this video to various points of the Wichita Mountains area, from hiking to unique places that you can visit and everything in between. But now let's go inside. Starting off our adventure here, I think it's important to pay nod to this particular sign. This is about the Civilian Conservation Corps and how they played such a big part in the Wichita Mountains Wildlife Refuge from 1933 to 1944. Now a lot of places have used the CCC for their construction phases during a very difficult time in our country. However, here we learned that the average pay for a month was $30, and 25 of that was sent directly back home to families in order to help with some of the Great Depression burdens that were placed on those families. This was a good job for people who were wanting to get out there and make something, and it was a fair wage at the time. So this is a sign that they have right outside of this because they did play such a part in the overall construction of some of the facilities. Now again, I'm attaching some videos to this, but there's a place called the Holy City, and when you go there it's kind of interesting because all of these buildings are made out of stone, and all of that was done by the Corps. But also I've done a tower hike out here that is a fabulous hike. Don't recommend it during summer, it's a little hot, but during the fall time this is a great way to see some of the fall leaves and also be able to get out and stretch. There is a massive tower also built by the Corps, but there's other structures as well here, and I think that that's just a really great way to start off our adventure. But now it's time for us to go into the more modern structure, which is the visitor center. Of course, starting off you can get maps and information here. I think this is super important, but they also have some other things like the bison store, which tells you all the different things that they used to use the bison to make in the indigenous cultures. It's pretty cool. Okay, so it's pretty neat because they have this table with all of these different things that you can actually get hands-on with and kind of see, but then also they have these books where you can learn about the vegetation that they have, and they're chock full of photos and scientific identifications. And then they also have some photos in an adjacent book, kind of over here on this end, with some of the actual pictures that they've taken out here of the animals. Something kind of cool that you learn whenever you come to places like this is what impact that they have on your experience and then also your quality of life as a whole. And one of the things that I really appreciate is that they tell us that there are 91 million acres of wildlife refuge throughout the United States. Of course, this is one of the larger ones though, but there's also a map that tells you a lot more about where each one of these are located. And there's a few of them in Texas and Oklahoma that I can go exploring, which I think is really cool. Okay, now that we're inside, there's a few things that we're going to kind of learn as we go. They're going to talk about the animals who are here, the wildlife refuge as a whole, the history, and also there's a 15-minute film, so I'm going to go check that out. But when you first come in, there's this beautiful bison that kind of is flanking you on both sides, and when you push the button you can hear the sounds of the bison. Now at one point in time the bison roamed freely everywhere, and as we know, there was a really bad thing that happened where they actually almost made them extinct by overhunting the area. And here you can find some photos of what that looked like, and it's really sad to see, especially considering that they meant so much to the people of this area. So with that said, I think we're gonna go watch this film and then I'll catch up with you. Wow, so the video was so insightful. So a few things that I learned. The Wichita Wildlife Refuge here was actually created to help preserve the bison. That was the whole reason. 60,000 acres were set aside so that they could have a refuge to bring these animals in after they were hunted to near extinction. And the interesting thing was that people didn't stop with just the bison. They started going in on the elk, and the elk were near extinct in this area as well. So this became a refuge for those also. And then they even added the Texas longhorns to this area because they were afraid that they were going to fade into the distance because they had been overused, overworked, and they had also been scaled back because whenever the cattle drives were coming through here, the shift in focus started to shift away from them. So 60,000 acres was set aside by President McKinley, and it was followed up by Teddy Roosevelt, who actually made this a possibility. And ever since then, they have been catering to these animals and creating what is considered the truest of the herds of these. And I think that's just really cool. Not only that though, they're also working toward helping other animals not become extinct, such as this tiny little bird that they have here, that they're allowing to have a thriving opportunity to grow and expand. And since they first started this project, they've expanded almost 4,500 pairs of birds now versus a very small, less than 100 that they had previous, which is awesome. So now we're going to move to some of the other parts of the museum to find out a little bit more about the refuge and see if there's anything else that it has in store. I can only imagine with what we just learned that we're just getting started. Here we move into a special place, and it talks about the natural habitats. And as we go through this section, it's going to teach us about each one of the habitats themselves, starting off with the ancient mountains. Now, Mount Scott is one of the most popular things that you can go up to here because it's the tallest peak. But whenever you're standing on top of it, you'll see granite boulders that you could explore. And this is between 500 and 550 million years old. In fact, from the top, it kind of looks like this, but they're actually stating that this is only the top of a much larger mountain range, which is actually hidden beneath the surface and unable to be seen today. In fact, the underground portion of this stretches all the way to Amarillo, which is over 200 miles away, which is wild and something I never knew. So that's one new brain wrinkle. It also tells us that if we would have visited 400 million years ago, we would have been completely and totally underwater because there was a sea here, and they're able to tell that based on the things that they've found in the very mountains that we were just talking about, which is interesting. In fact, all of the refuge lakes were man-made, but at one point everything was covered, every piece of the plains and prairie covered in water. Now here we see some of the grass, the native grass that grows in this area, and it says that grass is actually a provider. Could you plant millions of seeds in just the right combination to support everything? It asks you to challenge yourself to think about that, but also to realize that it took nature about 50 million years to develop this. And we learned in the movie that this little guy right here, the little humble prairie dog, is actually what makes all this possible, because they dig and they aerate the soil, which helps make optimum conditions for the grasses to grow. The fact of the matter is, everything is codependent here. You have to have every single part of this habitat to make it work, including the people. The people actually help with the controlled fires, which make everything optimum to continue the growth cycle so that we don't have the problem with wildfires. So I think that that's pretty interesting to see how everything kind of leads up to this much larger room that I just entered, where I see a snake. Oh no. In fact, as we start over here, it says pieces of a whole, and it talks about the refuge is one of nature's patchwork quilts. It includes rocklands, prairies, oak woodlands, and also waters. Yeah. There's the snake. It says this is in the Rocklands area. The Wichita Mountains rise from the plains like the great bison emerging from the earth, and over the years these ancient weathered peaks have defeated plows and preserved the native prairie. I have hiked in a lot of different places out here. I always do it during the winter months when it is cold, because you never know what's going to be dwelling on these rocks trying to get warm, and a lot of times even during the slightly less hot months you will still find snakes out here. So that is something to note and also to be careful of. Now along these rocky surfaces we learn more about some of the different animals we'll find, including the turkey vulture. They are considered nature's scavengers, and they eat all of the dead animals. They look like this up here, and they can be quite large. But next to that we have a collared lizard, and he kind of starts to blend into the rocks up here, but he is actually a resident of the rocky areas like this, and he is often seen basking on the boulders. Now as you're out and about in the Wichita Mountains area, you'll find boulders that have like these different colors on them, that's actually lichen. And the lichen are covered here as a segment called rainbow rocks. Now the lichen might look something like this, and it actually says that colorful lichens are a pioneer plant, and they appear on bare rocks and are actually paving the way for later arrivals. The lichens create soil by dissolving the minerals and slowly eroding the rocks. It says they're a variation of both algae and fungi living together as one. It's kind of fascinating, but I noticed that there are a plethora of different colors that you can find, especially the closer to the top of Mount Scott that you go. Now, in addition, they talk a little bit more about the different kinds of rocks that you'll find, everything from quartzite to Permian redbed, and then rhyolite, granite, and gabbro, which are all very interesting. And it has like their timeline on here as to when they would have started to be formed, and then also a few interesting facts about how you would be able to spot these whenever you're out and about. But then in addition, it shows you a map of where each of these are located by color. And it's pretty fascinating to see that quartzite is only really in one tiny little dot of the entire 60,000 acres. I always enjoy a good interactive element, and this one actually has several. So here we can find a small rockland resident lays 4 to 6 eggs in a nest, and it's cupped amongst the rocks. And then you can push the button. Do you hear that? Isn't that awesome? And then you can see what it is by lifting the panel, and you actually are listening to a canyon wren. That's pretty cool. Now again, because this is an expansive place, I'm going to leave these two for you all. But if you come here, let me know which of these three in the comments below is your favorite. Now, like in all public places, I like to highlight things like this. The reason being is that we as people are the most destructive force, and it's so often reflected in what we leave behind. In this particular location, however, it's even more abundantly clear that people can be the problem, because the reason why the refuge had to be created was because we overhunted various species and they needed to be protected. But also, even knowing that this is here for the animals, there's still people who come in and they leave their garbage behind. If you're ever out on a hiking trail or visiting a public space of any kind, take your trash and put it in a receptacle, or carry it back to your vehicle and throw it away whenever you get home. Please don't be part of the problem. It's a really big issue, especially in natural spaces, because it can not only damage the actual animals, but also the entire environment with all the moving pieces. So we need to do our part. In way of more critters that are here, they actually have the eastern cottontail, which is the most common rabbit in the east, and then also a bobcat, which looks like it's up to something no good. Shame on you, bobcat. Don't hurt the cottontail. Up high we have the North American elk, which is actually one of the species that they were hoping to save in the efforts of this wildlife refuge. And I think it's good that we have some signage here to tell us a little bit more about it, including what their mating season is, what kind of sounds that they make, and also what they do to assert their dominance. Like all wildlife locations, if you do see one of these guys or one of the bison, stay away. It is not safe to be all up in their space, because it can get really bad. So just kind of let them do their thing and watch from a safe distance. We're now moving over to the Refuge Waters, and it says every plant and animal needs water. So many animals visit the refuge lakes and ponds or the temporary streams to drink. And so here we're learning more about that. But did you know that a lot of the area that we have is actually made possible because they wanted to have a reservoir for the local area of Lawton. The area of Lawton was brand new at one point in time, and they needed some place to get some water so that their people could drink. And so they created a new lake, and it inspired them to really find ways to make the water move and things like that. So most of the waterways, as we discovered, are man-made waterways. However, whenever it rains, natural waterways suddenly break loose through these areas because the water goes from the top of the mountain to the bottom of the mountain. So at any given time, you could see natural pathways of water as well during the rainy season. In fact, it says that waters appear in several forms at the refuge, and all of them are very important. It says look for the springs, the seasonal streams, and the man-made lakes. And here you can find a few pictures of those, and then also learn about the snipe, which is a solitary, secret, and usually seen only when startled from water's edge bird. Don't blink or you'll miss it. But in addition, we get to learn a little bit more about how the animals themselves would use this watery area and what animals might thrive in this region, such as the beavers, which we kind of see hanging out under the water there. But you can see that he's been hard at work because this tree over here has been gnawed down. Also, you can see some of the other animals that would be flocking to the waterways to make sure that they are having hydration, including these foxes and even an otter. Again, we look at the human factor and how that plays into this though, and you'll notice that there is a little bobber in the water. And just above that, we learned that the refuge waters are definitely affected by people. Visitors enjoy the lakes and streams, but may not understand that the delicate cycle that they're interfering with can actually be something quite real. That's why it's super important to make sure that you're looking for the rules and following them whenever you're fishing and not overfishing the areas. And also if there are any things posted, such as like invasive species, that you make sure you're not bringing those in with you. I think that that's something we can all learn about our water recreation, and I like how they've tackled that with a way that you can physically see it, kind of like the trash. Ooh, this is about the night shift, and it talks about the world after dark. And on this sign you can see different names, but there's kind of like phantom images that you can only catch in certain light. But then we can go inside here and it's super dark, but I think there's something interesting. Okay, so I made it back out after listening to some of the crazy animals that were in the nighttime, and now we have found this area which talks a little bit more about the prairie dogs, but not just the prairie dogs. It tells us a little bit more about what it would be like to live in Prairie Dog Town. Here in the Wichita Mountains, they actually have something called Prairie Dog Town where you can go and check it out, and you can see all the little critters in their tunnels. But a lot of times we don't know what's going on beneath the surface. We just see them looking like this or making their little bark noises. But in fact, they have an elaborate tunnel system that they can live in. And they watch and they listen, and they have a series of ways that they can move and get out of the way from harm. We also learn a little bit more about the management that happens every single day here, and through this book it tells us about the different ways that they protect and preserve the area. And this could mean that they're helping out with the prairie dogs. It could mean that they're helping out by doing the prescribed fires or keeping the herds healthy, as they're hoping to expand the herd constantly. But the prairie dogs are not alone, and there's other things that actually live in this area. Here we find a tarantula and a wasp called a tarantula hawk. Now, believe it or not, this tiny little wasp actually can take down a full tarantula. It's very scary to see because he's fuzzy. He looks like he might not be that harmful, but then apparently he has this very specific ability to take down the tarantula. And that's kind of terrifying because, you know, he's so little, but he can do so much. Here we also learn about the different predators which are out there, and here you can see that the grasses are fed from the sun, and then the bison, the grasshoppers, and the prairie dog consume those. But then the poor little prairie dog actually has several predators, which brings us to defining the prairie. What is it? It's intertwining roots that mat into the soil, and then there's a multitude of different grasses that also start to stretch into the horizon. In fact, there's another interactive piece here that spins, and as it spins, it shows you the actual cycle of the life on the prairie and how it works. And I think that this is a very unique way to kind of show you that it has to go round and round. Without one step, the process cannot continue. Now, you can't just have fire though, you also have to have rain, and each one of these depicts what constitutes rain in different areas. For example, the desert. The desert receives 10 inches or less rainfall per year. A prairie gets between 10 and 39, and a forest gets between 30 and 60. We also get to learn about the places that do have prairies, and here you can find the tall grass prairie versus the mixed grass prairie versus the short grass prairie. So currently we are in the mixed grass prairie area, and that goes all the way up to Canada and into some portions of Texas. And then the short grass is going to be more toward the eastern Colorado, eastern Montana and Wyoming, and then also New Mexico. And then your tall grass prairie are going to be more up here in these upper states, including like Michigan and Minnesota, and then Iowa, Missouri, those kind of areas. These areas are so important and typically are found in areas that don't have quite as much rainfall, but they're such an important part of the bigger picture. Now, as we move into this more well-lit area with some windows out to the outside, we're going to learn a little bit more about the Conservation Corps, what they do, and why it matters, and kind of some of their history. It's through this section that we get to see some historic photos about some of the people who made some of this possible for us all to this day. In fact, this is some of the things that they were working on with some of the dams that created some of the area lakes, and then also some of the original corpsmen from way back in the 30s. Did you know that by 1935 the Corps consisted of 500,000 young men, and they worked on projects throughout the nation living in refuge camps like this? It was basically like a little tent city. Didn't have all the modern tools we have now. They used mules and a lot of elbow grease, and they were able to accomplish amazing things that still to this day stand and stand strong. And that goes to say a lot about construction. I think that as we've kind of moved away from that elbow grease and the stone masonry that we used to use a lot more of, our buildings just don't quite last the same way that they did. In addition, we learned that there was actually mining that was permitted in the Wichita Mountains at one point. September 24th, 1903, they actually reported that the boom is now on and gold fever has struck. And here you find a miner who's actually looking in the area. It says interest in mining of the Wichitas began as early as the 1650s when Spanish explorers were here. Now, a lot has changed. A whole lot has changed since when they first began. At first, it was about conserving and saving, and then they had to repopulate. And at one point in time, there was even thoughts that the prairie dogs were a bad part of that, and they were overpopulated, so they actually poisoned them. Of course, now we know that they're an intricate part in the actual grass growing, so they need them, so they allow them to have their time to shine also. But it's interesting to see how through these little signs you can see how the timeline of progress has been made since the original inception of this property. Again, going into a little bit more of the management area, we have a fire section that tells us a little bit more about the tools and supplies and how that they would equip themselves, but also there's a short film telling us a little bit more about fire management, and you can get it with or without closed captioning, which I think is amazing because accessibility matters. Just outside of that though, it's very interesting to see this. It's another interactive exhibit, and it says specialist or generalist. Some animals have a specific need for their home, their diet, or their young, and these animals are called specialists. The one species that's located in the refuge is the black-capped vireo, and it actually selects its nesting habitat in scrubby oaks along rocky hillsides. So here we can see, if we move this, some different animals and where they might find their homes. We have raccoons, we have little birds, we have coyotes, we have a few creepy crawlers in here. It's pretty neat. It also tells us a little bit more about which animals have been restored by pushing this button. So here we have several different animals that have been restored, and you can see these are the ones that are currently in the habitat itself. Now, my dad said that he has seen a raccoon here, and it was probably one of the biggest raccoons he had ever seen. With that said, there are a few animals that are not seen here. In fact, the gray wolf has not been sighted here since the early 1900s, and I think that that says a lot also about how, even though with the proper things in place, sometimes it's just too late with certain animals to integrate them into the area unless it is a man-made integration. It goes on to talk a little bit more about how many species are in fact endangered or on the list close to endangered. And here we see in 1995 over 900 species were listed worldwide by the Endangered Species Act. National wildlife refuges currently house about 60 different endangered species and are helping to repopulate them. So that's only 60 out of the bigger picture of numbers. So these places are extremely important, but they still are working toward being even more of a value to us all, so that these beautiful, amazing creatures that we need in our habitats and our environments can indeed thrive. So I think that that's kind of fascinating, but there's more. We now move into the Cross Timbers, and the Cross Timbers once stretched from central Oklahoma all the way into northern Texas, and it divided the western plains from the southeast forest. It was historically a rich region that featured woodlands, and it was considered to be dense and impenetrable, and early explorers and settlers usually avoided these. What's there though? All sorts of interesting critters, and here you can find some of those that would be hiding out, including a ringtail, which look how cute that guy is. It's very interesting. It's actually a cat-sized carnivore, and it resembles a small fox, but it has a long raccoon-like tail. Also in these areas, wild turkeys. Overhunting removed the original wild turkey from the Wichita Mountains, and in 1912, the first of several small flocks were relocated to the area once again from the Rio Grande turkeys. And here we learn a little bit more about them and how they travel in flocks, and then also we can hear what they sound like. Now we just talked about this particular bird and how they have reintegrated it and actually expanded it quite a bit. However, I just now learned that part of the reason why their habitat is shrinking is because of cowbirds. Because cowbirds lay their eggs in other birds' nests and take over their space. So here you can hear both the cowbird and also the vireo, and it's quite fascinating. Now behind me they do have a discovery center. It's designed for the kiddos. There's some kiddos playing back there, so I'm just gonna leave it be. But there's one more wall that I want to share with you, and then we're gonna head on to the gift shop because I think they have some patches here, and I am so excited to pick one up to check this off my bucket list. Okay, in this last section we have a living example, land for the future and enriching our lives. This area is pretty neat because they have these two sculptures, but then also they have photos taken from around the various areas here, and they also have some really nice quotes. Now again, I'm going to leave this particular area for you so you can read the quotes, but I do find this to be extremely fascinating. Oh, the kids moved out, so we can move in. This is the Discovery Zone area, and this is a hands-on area that has lots of great kid-friendly education. I think it's awesome because it's a big visual space that gives you an idea of the different animals in a very simplified way, and I think that that's really cool. But also, look at this. They have these giant facts and also challenges. Some lizards make themselves appear larger than they really are by doing push-ups, so then it says to do 10 push-ups. And then over here it says frogs make tasty snacks for many predators. Since frogs don't have sharp teeth or claws to defend themselves, hop like a frog for 10 feet. This is super cute. They also have a series of different like bones and skulls from the various kinds of animals that you'll find out here. And then you can also find some tips from tip to tip. How long do longhorns grow? And it says here most horns span about 6 feet wide, but the largest on record is 8 feet. So all in all, the brain wrinkles here are rich, but there are also tons of photos in this area that you can see that have been taken right here on property, on some part of the 60,000 acres, which I think is awesome. But now it's time to go and find out what all they have in the Visitors Center gift shop. This is my favorite part of every trip because it crosses off another exciting adventure. Found my patch, and now it's time to put it in the van. This was a great stop. I got so many brain wrinkles that now I can take back into the refuge itself and learn so many more things about the things that surround as I'm kind of moving throughout. Remember, check out those videos that I've previously done here. I think that they'll be fascinating to you. Some good hikes, some good information, and well, remember, we're not here for a long time, but we are here for a good time. Till next time, guys. Bye.